Hello, nerds!
Hello, nerds!
I have none other than Congressman Tim Ryan in the Nerd Zone. Sir, welcome to the show.
Good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
So, by the way, should I refer to you throughout this interview as Congressman Ryan, Mr. Ryan, Tim? How do you like to be addressed?
Tim is fine.
Oh, I appreciate that. That'll make it a lot easier. Okay, so Tim, you actually just came from a vote in Congress trying to legislate. What were you up to?
We're trying our best. Yeah, we just did a $1.5 trillion infrastructure bill, which had a lot of really great investments in it around the smart energy grid, around closing the digital divide. I think about $130 billion for schools and making sure that schools have the health and safety and equipment and technology that they need, in addition to the roads and bridges and ports and all of that we normally have to do. So just trying to rebuild the country and hopefully have some money out there so that when we do start going back to work, we're actually, putting people back to work in good paying jobs, but also kind of building the economy of the future too.
Yeah, it's interesting. I always heard that infrastructure was the last area of bipartisan sort of compromise, and generally that doesn't drive as much controversy. It doesn't feel like that's true anymore. Are you feeling like this time the country can actually agree on at least the importance of infrastructure?
No. I don't know if any Republican voted for the bill. It always comes down to how you're going to pay for it, and whether or not you're going to pay for it, and that's what's always been the holdup, because you got to generate some revenue. I mean, the gas tax revenue that used to go into the pot that was used for rebuilding roads and bridges doesn't generate that much money. You've got high mileage vehicles, you've got electric vehicles, so that just the money's not going in there like it used to. So you have to find another revenue stream. But these are really great investments. The business community wants it, the workers want it, the people want it. There's all kinds of traffic issues, there's transit issues, and so it needs to get done. And we've just lost the ability to think through like this is an investment that's going to yield growth, as opposed to it's just a spending item on a balance sheet.
Did you feel like there was as much concern about how to pay for the stimulus, the Corona stimulus before? Well, I'm curious why. I mean, that one went through with bipartisan support.
Yeah. I mean, you have these emergencies that arise, and you got to do what you got to do. I mean, you start doing them. I mean, I think Republicans were forced to maybe do it because of everything that was going on. But yeah, we all need to be concerned about, long-term debt and deficits and all of those things. I think any mature adult recognizes that those are important to think about. But you also have to appreciate an investment. And during a time of emergency, you got to do what you got to do just to plug holes. But we should look at these things differently. I think this has been part of the problem in the country, is that we don't see things as, okay, I make this investment of X amount of money. All the economists will tell us about growth that comes from those investments, efficiencies that may come from those investments, cost savings, people not sitting in traffic, those kind of things. Those all bring some value, and we've lost that. We've lost that line of thinking.
Yeah, I was just talking to a friend of mine in Seattle. She lives in West Seattle, and there's a bridge to go from Seattle to West Seattle that now they can't use anymore, and they don't even know if they can repair it. It's in such bad condition. So it's a shame, because I would have thought the business-minded Republicans would see this as something that truly would pay for itself over time with more efficiency.
Well, I think the National Chamber of Commerce does. I think a lot of the business groups do. But then you say, well, how are we going to pay for it? Is it going to be a gas tax? Is it going to be a transaction tax? Is it, what's it going to be? How are you going to pay for it? And that's when, they hit the brakes. Everything comes to a stop, and it's just, nobody wants to pay taxes, but we also have a whole country we need to rebuild that we haven't reinvested in the way we should. And it's an opportunity really to modernize. You talk about technology, you talk about the digital divide. You see kids going home without computers or access to Wi-Fi. I mean, those are huge investments that we could make that would just yield so much growth and benefit and creativity and wealth that could be created. But you can't. I represent towns like Youngstown, Ohio, is one of the bigger towns that I represent. And what we've seen over the last 30 or 40 years is a complete erosion of the tax base. And so, you say, well, pull yourself up by your bootstraps and this and that. And then if you do try to attract a business, you've got to give them a 10-year tax abatement. So you don't even really generate the revenue. So it's so hard for these communities to really rebuild themselves that I believe in my mind that these investments through the federal government around things like infrastructure and education and skills gap, closing of the skills gap, those kind of things are going to yield a lot of benefits to where that town can get itself back up on its feet and then become self-sufficient.
Yeah, it's hard to break that cycle. It's sort of like if you had a struggling company that needed more investment, you wouldn't say, well, you should just generate more revenue. It's like, well, yeah, we can't generate revenue because we need to make these investments.
Yeah.
So hopefully cooler heads will prevail and there will be some compromise. But it doesn't sound like you're super optimistic.
I'm not optimistic right now. I mean, everything we sent to the Senate is, shot down. And, there's no, we talk about, different approaches that Andrew and I have talked about and just having a bigger conversation about how to solve some of these problems. One of the things the country lacks now is really imagination. I mean, there are a lot of really cool things happening across the board, not just in technology. Innovations in education around social and emotional learning, innovations around healing veterans who have post-traumatic stress, around meditation and yoga and acupuncture and these things, innovations around agriculture with regenerative agriculture and all. I mean, just across the board, cool shit happening. And there's almost no recognition from the federal government that we can invest into these things and share information so that, top performing school districts are doing X, Y, or Z. That information can be shared. Whole opportunities around what are we going to do with properties and land use now after the coronavirus when everybody starts teleworking, Like, what are we going to do with all these buildings? Because you've heard it, I've heard it. A lot of companies are saying, when's my lease up? Because I just realized I don't need this big building anymore. And what are we going to do? Where's the imagination? Where's the creativity to try to solve that problem?
Tim, how much do you think the difficulty addressing these sort of more innovative approaches and new ideas is partly because the Congress and the Senate are made up of people from different generations who are
very polite. You're doing a good job. Keep going. I'm watching. There's all kinds of landmines around you. Keep going.
I know, seriously, brother. I'm not running for office. But, the folks who grew up with mobile phones sort of in their hands when they were in diapers, like those aren't the people that are in Congress.
Yeah.
And often they're not the people who are embracing new technology on the cutting edge. How much of that do you think is just sort of a generational struggle with a different worldview? And maybe is it time, what do you think about the composition of our representatives?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's obvious that that's always, sorry, I'm in a car. I think that's always an issue. And I think, to be fair, I think our leadership and when you look at this bill around infrastructure, it's clear that our leadership, that head of the Transportation Committee, Pelosi and Hoyer and those guys, they understand the need for the kind of things we were talking about a smart grid and closing the digital divide and things like that. So I think the bread and butter stuff they get. But what's happening now is we are having leaders emerge. I was just talking to Haley Stevens. She's a new Democratic member from Michigan. She worked in the Obama administration, has a background in manufacturing, advanced manufacturing, new next generation manufacturing. She is now chair of the subcommittee that oversees NIST and the National Science Foundation. So I just found that out yesterday, and I was talking to her. I was like so excited. I'm like, that's exactly who we need, a young, dynamic leader who has a knowledge of the technologies that are happening, and she's on the subcommittee that can move a lot of things in those areas. So it's starting to happen slowly. I mean, Congress is always last of the dance. You go back to women's suffrage, you go back to civil rights, you go back to anything significant that has happened in the country. The people were way ahead of the Congress. We got to try to change that. But it's starting to happen, but it takes a lot of the outside pressure from groups like, the ones you're connected to.
Why do you think Congress is often kind of a lagging indicator in that, my understanding was like, well, this is supposed to be like of the people, short terms. These are just drawn from the citizenry. Why do you think it's so different than the people they represent sometimes?
Well, the House is leaps and bounds better, at least under our leadership, I think, than the Senate is. So we are a little bit more nimble, but it's hard to explain to people just how difficult it is to get something done. I mean, you have 435 members of Congress that are from all different parts of the country, all different interests, all different economic status, different occupations, different experiences, different religions, different worldviews, and to try to get a majority of that group on an agenda that you can get 220 or 30 votes for. It's not easy. It's got to go through the committee process, and then you got to get it through the House, and that's a monumental achievement. And then you got to get it through the goddamn Senate. I mean, that is like impossible. Because now you need 60 votes in some instances to be able to 60 of 100, and there a whole new different set of politics comes in, and who's up for re-election, and who wants this, and who wants that, and who's the president. So all of those things have come into play in the middle of a very polarized electorate, and so. I thought, when President Obama was in, I thought we were able to really get some good stuff done. I mean, we did a lot. People could agree or disagree, but we were able to move a lot of significant pieces of legislation, universal health care. We passed a big energy bill, to move into the green energy realm. We did the financial regulation piece. We did the stimulus bill. We did the, other things to help get the economy back up and going. So we did a lot. And those periods are few and far between. You go years and years and years of gridlock, and then boom, all of a sudden you get a series of things that happen. So it's just the makeup of the thing, man. But I think, not to ramble on too long here, but I do think that we've got to start looking at government differently. And this is where I think, your crowd, guys like me, Andrew, and others, like, how do we get this machinery of government to start working? How do we use technology? How do we use AI? How do we use our ability to communicate so quickly? How do we use that to cut through the bureaucracy? How do we use that to streamline procurement through the Department of Defense? How do we use that to take best practices in communities that are just, kicking ass, doing economic development, using new market tax credits, using their port authority, how do we get that technical expertise in the places who have no clue how to use that stuff? How do we get that expertise to businesses who have I just saw a paper, Progressive Policy Institute did a paper on 50 to 60% of small and mid-sized manufacturers have no clue how to use artificial intelligence and don't use it at all. And don't really know about it on how to ramp up productivity for their business. They can't go out and hire McKinsey to do to consult for their company and tell them how to use the latest and greatest technology. So how does the government have a system in place or a program in place that's able to just get that knowledge to that mid-sized manufacturer in a place like Youngstown, Ohio? And I think that's going to be the trick in the next decade. How do we have school districts able to learn from school districts who are using transformational techniques like social and emotional learning, like financial literacy, like entrepreneurship, whatever it is? How do you get that expertise diffused around the country? And we have the ability to do that. We just got to figure out how to make it happen.
Yeah, well, since this is the Nerds for Humanity show and we have a big Yang Gang contingency, I'd have to ask you, do you think that there was an argument that if there were a basic income, that some of the smartest and most promising grads who are well trained in technology and AI and social and emotional learning and all this kind of great stuff and psychology, they might actually be more likely to work as a teacher or work with a small business because they can figure like, well, I can still make, I can still have a decent living. Today, some of them feel like, well, I have to go to Goldman Sachs or I have to be an analyst at McKinsey because, those other options, they just are so kind of out of reach for them economically. It doesn't make sense to do that. Do you have any thoughts? Like, we often talk about basic income as something to help the impoverished, which it would, but a lot of people argue that it would allow very talented people to do jobs that are better for the community that currently the economics don't make sense for them.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I could see where that would be the case. I think a lot of people are in jobs that they don't necessarily like. They would rather do something else. I mean, I think all the time about being a school teacher, and a coach. I would love to do that. One of the reasons I didn't is because you didn't make that much money.
Yeah.
But if I did it, my wife did it, and they both got a basic income supplement, yeah, maybe it's a different view. So I see that point. I've not heard that, but yeah, that makes sense. That would be a good argument.
Let me ask you this, Tim. You've been in Congress now for 18 years. Is that right? Or
yeah, you see all this gray hair? This side is from Congress.
There you go.
This side is from Mason and Bella.
I was going to say those are probably your kids. Yeah. When you got there, were you thinking like, I'm going to raise all hell and change the world in a few years and then come back to your previous life? Or were you thinking this is going to be a multi-decade effort?
I wasn't sure. I think for the most part, I thought I was going to stick around a little bit. I had chances to run for governor and Senate, and I wanted to help my community. I grew up in Northeast Ohio, and my goal, because there was a good deal of frustration for people my age, I'll be 47 in a couple weeks, in Northeast Ohio, that our friends were leaving. Our communities were falling apart. We were losing jobs. And I just got it in my head, like, I'm staying here and I'm going to do something about it. And that to me meant staying focused in Congress for a while. I got on the Appropriations Committee. Back when we had earmarks, I was bringing money back. We started a big additive manufacturing institute. We started an energy incubator. We did a bunch of quality of life stuff in our downtowns around bike trails and river walks and amphitheaters and the kind of quality of life stuff you need to keep young talent around. Did social and emotional learning, got an earmark for that. So I knew I was staying in Congress, but it wasn't like, I'm going to build up seniority, I'm going to have this long career, and I'm going to be a chairman. It was more like, I'm staying here until I get enough stuff done that really help my community. And we need a lot of work. And then I really realized there's a lot of other communities around the country that are in the same boat as we are. And that broadened my view a little bit. And that's why I ran for president. And, and I'm moving up on some of these committees now. And like, okay, now what do I do? Like, I'm not qualified for anything else.
Well, you can always make another run. 2024 is coming, right?
You never know. Never know. We'll see.
Tell me a little bit about how you would help people listening to this think about the term, it's a bit of a negative term, career politician, right? And so on the one hand, I watch Congress and I'm like, wow, it takes forever to get stuff done for all the reasons you described earlier.
Yeah.
And so, you probably need time to just figure out how to work within the system. And then there's, seniority and all this kind of stuff and relationships. On the other hand, there's a lot of people who feel like, man, part of the problem is that the folks in Congress, they've lost kind of a connection with the communities they represent. And we need to refresh it more often. How would you help people think about that kind of conundrum?
I would say it's not much different than probably any business, or any other institution. Yes, there are people who come here to collect a paycheck, don't do a whole lot, keep getting reelected. There's no question. There are people here who are very savvy legislators. It's a very complicated process, and it's multidimensional because it's both about issues that you need to be on the cutting edge. Okay, what's best? What can help? But then you also need to know how to navigate the committee process. Then you need to have relationships in the Senate. And so trust, which is in any business dealing that you have, trust is a major factor of being able to move the ball down the field. And so these things are all playing out at the same time, as well as what's happening nationally around which way the political winds are blowing. And then you look at the issues. I mean, I sit on the Defense Committee, and I will tell you that this committee covers, and like a lot of them do, everything from cybersecurity to space and the satellites, all of the different technologies around artificial intelligence, additive manufacturing. You get into healthcare for the service members, the active duty service. How does the healthcare system function? Construction on the bases. You got planes, you got tanks, you got helicopters, you got trucks, you got bullets, you got guns, you got like a million different. That's just the Defense Department, right? And so, it does take time to really try to have some idea of what's going on in all of these different areas, so that you develop a level of expertise in those areas, and that does take time. I mean, I don't want to go have heart surgery by somebody who's, only been doing it for a few years, Mm-hmm. I don't want a teacher necessarily who's only been doing something. I don't want someone building my house who's building the first couple of houses. So it's like anything else. And I'm not here to defend it because I know how screwed up it is and I know how screwed up it looks. But I was in the state legislature in Ohio, and they had term limits, and it was just a circus because nobody knew what the fuck they were doing. I mean, it was like you couldn't get anything done because everyone was just constantly, they would run for the House for, I think it was 6 years or 8 years. And then, so as soon as they got in, then they could run for the state Senate. Right. So now they're looking at just about getting elected. And I'm like, you guys are like, and another thing about being in for a while, if we're going to have, an honest conversation about it, is like, my constituents know me. I've been in for a long time. I grew up there. I've been in 18 years. They know where my heart is, right? And if I have to make a tough vote on something that I think, because I've been doing this and I've been studying it and my family lives there and I've got their interest at heart and they know that I can make a tough vote that maybe is in the national interest, that is maybe a tough vote, but I think it's the right thing for the country. And I can go back to them and say, guys, I mean, I'm one of you. I mean, you know me. I've been doing this. When would I ever vote against your interests? That's what I do. And I'm telling you, you may not see it, but this is in your interest. Like, we have to wear masks, or this virus is real and we've got to be careful. Like, anywhere from that to another maybe geopolitical issue. But to have established that relationship over time, you develop some trust that you could maybe be a leader. I mean, I played a lot of sports growing up, and you start buying into what your coach is saying because the coach loves you and cares about you and wouldn't ask you to do things that weren't in your own best interest. And so you start to trust them. And I think there's a little bit of that there's got to be trust. And part of the problem we have today is not a lot of trust.
No, there's not an excess amount of trust going around these days. Tim, I want to do a time check. We're at 25, so you want me to wrap it in 5?
No, let's go. We do another
Okay.
10, 15 minutes. Yeah.
Great. So let's talk about the presidential run. That's a pretty huge deal for anyone. What did you learn from it? Like what was surprising in terms of that experience for you?
The grind, it was the time away from family, the early mornings, the flights, to all these states that you can't really get there from here kind of thing. You got, you got to have a layover and, just the grind is something that I don't think you can really anticipate. And the thing that the big takeaway for me is that we're all in the same boat. I mean, I could be in rural Iowa. I could be in a African-American community in South Carolina. I could be in an old mill town in New Hampshire. I could be in a, Latino community in Nevada. And the challenges for everybody are the same. It's bread and butter stuff, opportunity, wages, healthcare, and good education for their kids, a safe community. Like there's 5 or 6 like key things that you just kept hearing about, and I was like, man, this is unreal. We seem so divided, we seem so different, and the media highlights that, and obviously the president highlights that, and we really are all in the same boat, and we're all dealing with the same challenges. And I think the quicker we figure that out, the more we can come together to really solve some of these big problems. But that was my big takeaway.
If you could do it all over again, what would you have done differently to get further along in the campaign?
I would have gotten in early. I would have gotten in earlier. I got a young family like Andrew does, and I just, was going back and forth. Am I really going to be ready to do this? Is the family ready for me to do this? And I think that caused a little bit of a pause that probably got me, a little behind. And then what I should have done, I should have just stayed in New Hampshire. I spent a lot of time on the road, running to Iowa, 99 counties. It was a big state. And I could have probably done better if I just stayed in New Hampshire and just worked New Hampshire. I had some friends there. I had some good endorsements there. And they got tech in the southern part of New Hampshire. They got a little yoga mindfulness thing going on there, which I wrote a book about mindfulness called Healing America. There were some interesting people that were interested in my agricultural positions around regenerative agriculture. I wrote a book called Real Food Revolution. And Stony Brook's there. A lot of people were interested in like organic and regenerative ag. So I just looking back now, I mean, who knows at the time, because you're drinking out of a fire hose. But if I'd have just stayed in New Hampshire, I think I could have made some more headway.
I've heard that from a lot of people from other campaigns as well.
Have you?
Iowa didn't pan out the way everybody expected. I think even the people who did well weren't sure if it was worth it.
Yeah. It's a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of money in Iowa.
Yeah. Now, through that process, I hear people, you see familiar faces, you get to know the other candidates. Could you share an Andrew Yang story? It seems like you guys have good chemistry, but just curious.
Yeah, no, I saw him in New Hampshire a few times. I saw him out in California, and we both addressed the Sunrise Movement, and it was just a lot of fun. High energy, and you know the drill better than I do. But yeah, it just a lot of fun, and just watching him kind of be himself, be down to earth and no pretense, and I just love that about him, because I like to think I'm the same way. If you think you're important, like I really don't want anything to do with you, because that's so off-putting. And, having a self-deprecating sense of humor. And I got to see that up close with him. And I really, just fell in love with the guy.
So do you think someday you guys could work together in government in a more direct capacity?
Yeah, that'd be great. I would love to see Andrew involved in the government. I'd love to see him involved in a Biden administration. I think he could be, a super big asset. I felt, and I said this, in the campaign, that I really feel like he articulated whether you agreed with the dividend or not, he articulated the issues around technology and its effect on the economy better than anyone else in the race. And that was a really, really important contribution. I mean, we all think it's bullshit. Yeah, you contributed to the race. Yeah, you were the Midwest, blue collar guy. Yeah, you were like, yeah, screw that. I wanted to win. But that was really a big contribution, because I think a lot of, myself included, I'm not there on the dividend yet, but I'm a lot closer to understanding it, appreciating it, wanting to have more conversations about it, offering a $2,000 a recurring payment now to help get us through the coronavirus, which me and Ro Connor are doing, than I was, because of what he did and how he ran, and so it matters. And I would love to see him involved in the Biden administration, and that'd be great to be able to work with him on a lot of these issues. I think he would contribute a great deal.
Let me ask you, Tim, about 2020, the presidential race as it stands today. One of the hot topics within the Yang Gang is whether the community should throw its support and energy behind the Biden campaign. And one of the arguments to not do so is that, oh, look, it's too sort of old generation people who they're like the opposite of Andrew Yang. Like, if you liked Andrew Yang, you wouldn't be like, and my second choice is Biden. Right? And so then there's another school of thought, which is like, hey, the president is so bad that Biden may not be, top of anybody's list or many people's list, but he's certainly way better than the alternative, and it would be a good transitional kind of bridge to the future leadership. What would you say to the folks who got all fired up about Andrew and now are still feeling like they're looking for a new camp to join?
Well, there's only two camps to get in, and one camp is burning the country down right now, and has we know what's going on. I mean, it's almost a waste of time for me to talk about it, because I know this group knows exactly what's happening in the country and how dangerous it is, and the recent articles and reporting around Russian bounties on American soldiers and not doing anything about it, not denying it, lying. I feel like the president, if his lips are moving, he's lying. And I think it's really dangerous for a lot of different reasons. And I would just say, politics is obviously, steps moving in the right direction. But wouldn't you want to vote for somebody who would appreciate what Andrew Yang is doing, understands what he's doing, maybe bring him into the administration to begin the changes that you all want and that I want, and other young, leaders who understand this stuff? To me, that would be a clear choice to be able to do that. And I will say, I know most people don't know this, but Vice President was in the Additive Manufacturing Institute that we have in Youngstown, Ohio, America Makes. It was the Obama-Biden administration. Biden had his fingerprints all over that. He understands that, the technologies of the future, electric vehicles, batteries, charging stations, additive, AI. All of us in politics, we can't necessarily get into the weeds on all of this stuff, but we know a significant amount about the impact it can have, that China's, running circles around us on some of this stuff, and that we better get our act together. And the vice president knows that. He's going to surround himself with people who understand that, probably like Andrew. I'm not here to, I don't have any inside information, but versus the Trump administration, I mean, it's like, let's hit the reset button. Let's get Joe Biden in. Let's make these moves around, the new economy, closing the skills gap, which the vice president talks a lot about, investing into the latest and greatest technologies. And then, we can go from there. But right now, if we get another 4 years, we're going to be really behind the 8 ball.
Let me ask you this, Tim. A lot of our viewers are actually former Trump voters who were persuaded by Andrew to, sort of think a little differently. And many of them are gravitating back to the president. And the argument I've heard them make is that, oh, Tom, you're always so hard on Trump, but you're kind of in this orange man bad mode. Like you're believing the media's narrative. If he's not the way that he's being portrayed. And I'm curious, like you're in DC, you are working on legislation that has probably some White House interactions, and you're closer to it than certainly many of us are. You're not only consuming mass media. I mean, is he as he seems, or do you think maybe people are too hard on the guy?
He's clueless. I mean, I will say that, we worked a lot with Secretary Mattis. And Mattis is someone I have an enormous amount of respect for and work closely with. And he put some really key people into some key positions into the Pentagon, especially around tech transfer and some different things. And so there were a couple really good hires in that context. And I do work very closely with them. But now Mattis is gone, and you see what he's saying. You see what Rex Tillerson is saying. You see what these guys who are with him are saying. And I would just say, like the competition with China, in my estimation, is going to be one of the most critical things that will define our lifetime. And the president doesn't really understand that at all. And he doesn't understand that we're actually going to, the trade and issues, you need fairness, and I've supported some of that, but it's not getting a fight with China and try to use it as a political issue. It's about how do we outcompete them, and he does not have an agenda around how do we outcompete them, and they are leapfrogging us on additive. They're leapfrogging us with with what's going on with Huawei. They're pumping a ton of money into artificial intelligence, and they've got this Make It in China 2025 initiative. They want to dominate the top 10 industries across the board in the world. They're starting to do that. This is obviously pre-corona. They dominated about 50 to 60% of the electric vehicle market. So my point is that the Biden administration, which I'll be working closely with, will have a plan on how to dominate that future. And I know you have a lot of libertarians too, and it's always a tricky thing. But I do believe that the sweet spot is there's got to be these public-private partnerships, and that we've got to close the digital divide. We've got to close the skills gap, and we've got to find the most creative, imaginative ways, including utilization of the free market and all of the power that it has to close that skills gap, to reinvest back into these communities, to get venture capital out of just the top 3 states of New York and California. I think in Boston, 80% goes to those 3 states. And so there's no public investment in Youngstown, Ohio, right? There's no private investment in Youngstown, Ohio. So we've got to reimagine how this works. And I get, like, the government does not have all the answers. I get that it's in many ways too big and too bureaucratic, but it has essential things that it has to do. So bringing the imagination, the concept of efficiencies, using the power of the free market as much as we possibly can, and then fill in the holes, I think is really going to be important. And I would just say, I don't think that the Trump administration has shown any understanding of all that. And I mean, it's just, to me, he's just been a big disappointment. And I recognize I'm probably one of the few people who can see the similarities between why a Yang voter would both be a Trump voter and gravitate to Yang, because you're talking about Trump talked about transforming the system. He talked about draining the swamp and blowing things up, and then didn't. Andrew has a real agenda on how to do that. And I would say if you had to pick, I would say that a progressive Democratic president with a new generation of people around them, like me, like Andrew, is going to move a lot more in the direction that you would want than a second Trump administration.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you, Tim, and I almost am more worried about an untethered second term of Trump.
Oh my
where
God.
He doesn't have to worry about re-election. Like, what will he do? Like Jared running around? Like, I don't know.
just gassing people for no reason, man. Who knows what'll happen?
Yeah. So, well, Tim, you've been very generous with your time. I really appreciate it. Was there anything that we didn't cover that you're working on, or that you want people to know about to kind of stay more informed about what you're up to, or what things you're thinking about?
Yeah, I would say the two things that we mentioned them: the social and emotional learning, the practice of mindfulness, meditation, like really trying to use these approaches to deal with trauma. I think one of the things that we probably could all agree on is, in my political philosophy, is how do you get to the root cause of the problems, the challenges that we have. And the root cause in education, and a lot of it's funding, but a lot of it, what's happening with our kids is trauma. Our kids are in trauma, and we're seeing it manifest itself now in depression and suicides and mental health issues. And it's only going to get worse as time goes on. And so addressing that root cause of trauma, using social and emotional learning, using mindfulness and these other practices to be able to really help them heal. And then what's the root cause of the problems? A lot of the climate issues we have is our agricultural system. We've destroyed our soil. That's really the root cause. And regenerative agriculture helps build the soil. It helps sequester carbon, and it produces a much better result for the environment. So if you're a libertarian, just trying to appeal to your audience here, like getting to the root cause of these problems, I think should be the responsibility of the government to help people understand how to do that and maybe put a little bit of money behind it. And so if we had a world where we were using regenerative agriculture, we could sequester a great deal of carbon over the next 10, 20 years. We could rebuild our soils. That would help with flooding. That would help with droughts, and on and on and on and on. So I would just say keep an eye on those two things, because those really shouldn't be political either. Those are very conservative principles. They could be, soft and left, hard and right. They could be libertarian. But I would follow me on those two things, because I'm going to be pushing those a lot in the next few years.
Right on. Well, Tim, I hope we see more of you in the future. You're a young fella, so I think you've got a few more runs left in you, and excited to see what you're up to next. And best of luck with getting hopefully some infrastructure progress in the meantime. And would love to have you back on the show in the future.
I would love that. Thanks, Tom. And I appreciate you. I like this format where you can actually talk and listen and hear and express yourself. So I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, man. Always good to have a conversation where we can both be present and give it some air. So I appreciate you hooking us up with your busy schedule. And with that, we're going to say goodbye, nerds.
All right. Goodbye, nerds.